A wealthy boy was dying in a room full of doctors, and none of them could explain why. All his tests came back clean, yet his body was fading away as if something was suffocating him from within. Meanwhile, a poor girl watched in silence, haunted by a pain from her own past. And when all the experts had failed, she stormed into the room and ripped the truth from his throat. If this powerful story of survival and love has you hooked, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let us know what city you're watching from to continue. The silence of St. Jude's Medical Center was shattered by the roar of an ambulance that tore through the main gate like a bullet. It was 3 a.m. on a Tuesday when 10-year-old Oliver Sterling arrived, carried by paramedics who rushed through the corridors with the urgency of those fighting against time. The boy was unconscious, his skin a terrifying shade of grey, his lips nearly purple, and his breathing was so weak it sounded like a desperate whisper. Edward Sterling followed behind the gurney, his hair disheveled, still wearing pajamas under a coat thrown on in haste. His hands shook as he held his phone, firing off calls to the best doctors in the country. As one of the wealthiest and most influential men in the United States, Edward had never felt such despair. His entire financial empire, all his political connections, none of it mattered in that moment. His only son was wasting away before his eyes. "I need the best specialists here now," Edward shouted at anyone who would listen. "I don't care what it costs. Bring them all." While chaos took over the hospital's VIP wing, a small figure watched everything from a dark corner of the hallway. Isabella Miller, also 10 years old, held tightly to the hand of her mother, Sarah, who had been called in for an emergency cleaning of the corridors. The girl should have been at home asleep, but there was no one to care for her at that hour. Isabella had large, expressive eyes that seemed to absorb every detail around her. Since she was little, she had developed the ability to be almost invisible, a necessity when her mother took her to work. But being invisible also meant being able to observe without being noticed. When the gurney carrying Oliver passed her, a chill ran down Isabella's spine. There was something familiar about the scene, something that awakened a painful memory in her mind. The greyish tone of the boy's skin, the laboured breathing, the look of panic on the faces of the adults around him. She had seen all of this before. "Mum," Isabella whispered, pulling on the sleeve of Sarah's uniform. "That boy looks just like Dad did." Sarah looked at her daughter with a tired expression. It had been only 6 months since they lost Isabella's father, and the girl was still processing the trauma. "Don't make things up, honey. Everyone gets sick in different ways." But Isabella couldn't get the image out of her head. She remembered her father's final days perfectly, a 42-year-old construction worker who began showing strange symptoms after returning from a job at a farm in the countryside. First came the shortness of breath, then the skin changing color, and finally that dry cough that seemed to tear his throat from the inside. The doctors at the local clinic where they took her father could never explain what was happening. They ran a few basic tests, prescribed flu medicine, and said it would pass, but it didn't. In 2 weeks he was gone, leaving Sarah a widow and Isabella fatherless. Now, watching Oliver being taken into the ICU, Isabella felt the same icy fear she had felt during those terrible days. But there was something more, something that bothered her deeply. A smell. A damp, unpleasant odor she noticed as the gurney passed her, different from the usual smell of hospital disinfectant. It was the same smell that had permeated her father's room in his final weeks of life. In the following hours, St. Jude's Medical Center transformed into a military-style operations center. Edward had managed to gather 10 of the most renowned doctors in the country, each a specialist in a different field. Dr. Richard Alcott, a cardiologist famous for saving high-profile politicians. Dr. Margaret Foster, a pulmonologist who had studied at Harvard. Dr. Paul Mitchell, a neurologist with dozens of international awards. All of them now took turns in Oliver's room, determined to figure out what was happening. Isabella and her mother remained at the hospital throughout the early morning, Sarah obsessively cleaning the hallways while her daughter watched the constant movement of doctors, nurses, and medical equipment being wheeled into the VIP suite. The girl noticed that with every passing hour the specialist's expressions grew more tense, more worried. Around 6 in the morning, She managed to get close enough to the room's door to overhear part of a conversation between the doctors. "All the tests are coming back normal," Dr. Alcott said, frustration evident in his voice. "Blood work, chemistry, CT scans, MRIs, nothing indicates the cause of this deterioration." "It's impossible," Dr. Foster murmured. "The boy is clearly suffering from some form of progressive respiratory failure, but there are no signs of infection, trauma, or pre-existing conditions." "Perhaps it's some rare condition," Dr. Mitchell suggested. "Something we haven't catalogued yet." Edward, who was sitting by his son's bed, raised his head, his eyes red with exhaustion and despair. "I don't care what it is or how rare it is. Find a solution." Isabella felt her heart race. She knew that feeling of despair. She had lived through the same anguish by her father's bedside. But there was something the doctors weren't considering, something she clearly remembered from her father's last days. He had complained of a terrible itching in his throat, a sensation that something was moving inside. The doctors said it was paranoia caused by a lack of oxygen to the brain, but Isabella remembered a specific moment on the last night when she saw something move quickly out of her father's mouth during one of his coughing fits. Something dark and long that vanished before she could be sure of what she had seen. Back then she was just a scared child whom no one took seriously. Now, seeing Oliver with the exact same symptoms, she was certain she hadn't imagined anything. But how could a poor 10-year-old girl convince a team of renowned doctors that she was seeing something they had missed? The day passed slowly, and Oliver's condition continued to decline. Medical equipment alarms rang constantly, and Isabella could see Edward aging by the hour, his features becoming more etched with worry and the fear of losing his only son. At 5 in the evening, when Sarah finally finished her cleaning shift, she found Isabella still sitting in the hallway, staring fixedly at the door of the VIP suite. "Let's go, honey. You've spent the whole day here." But Isabella didn't move. "Mom, I need to talk to the doctors. It's about the boy." Sarah sighed, taking her daughter by the hand. "Isabella, you're a child. These men studied their whole lives to be doctors. Do you think you know something they don't?" "I do, Mom," Isabella insisted, her eyes shining with a determination that surprised Sarah. "It's just like what happened to Dad." At that exact moment, a shrill alarm echoed through the hallway. The doors to Oliver's room burst open, and doctors rushed inside with emergency equipment. Through the half-open door, Isabella could see the boy convulsing on the bed, his skin even grayer, almost lifeless. And then, for a fraction of a second, she saw it. During one of the convulsions, something dark and long appeared for an instant in Oliver's throat, before disappearing again. It was exactly what she had seen on that terrible night with her father. Isabella let go of her mother's hand and took a step toward the room, knowing she might be the only person in that hospital who truly understood what was happening to Oliver Sterling. Sarah pulled Isabella by the arm harder than necessary, trying to lead her away from the commotion forming around the VIP room. But the girl resisted, planting her feet on the cold hospital floor. "Mum, please, I saw something in his throat," Isabella pleaded, her words tripping over each other in her urgency. "It's just like what happened to Dad." "Enough, Isabella," Sarah whispered through clenched teeth, glancing nervously around to make sure no one was paying attention. "You're going to get us in trouble. These people are important, and we are just staff here." But Isabella couldn't control herself. The image of that dark thing in Oliver's throat was burned into her mind, overlaid with the terrible memory of her father's last night. She broke, free from her mother's hand, and ran to one of the male nurses exiting the room. "Please, sir," she cried, pulling on the hem of the man's white coat. "I need to talk to the doctors. It's about the boy." The nurse, a tall, middle-aged man, looked at her with irritation. "Kid, get out of the way. This is no place for children." "But I know what's happening to him," Isabella insisted, tears starting to flow. "My dad had the same thing." "Security!" the nurse called out, gesturing for someone to remove the girl. Sarah ran to her daughter, grabbing her shoulders firmly. "I'm sorry, sir. She lost her father recently, and she's a bit confused." She turned to Isabella with stern eyes. "We are going home. Now." As she was dragged down the hallway, Isabella managed to hear fragments of the tense conversation happening inside the room. Edward was shouting at the doctors, demanding answers they didn't have. Dr. Alcott spoke about the need for more tests, Dr. Foster mentioned the possibility of transferring Oliver to a hospital abroad, but none of them spoke about checking the boy's throat. None of them had seen what she saw. At the hospital exit, Sarah finally stopped and knelt in front of her daughter. "Isabella, listen closely to what I'm going to tell you. Your father died because it was his time. It wasn't because of any bug or monster in his throat. It was a disease, and now you need to accept that." "But, Mom, I saw it. I saw it come out of his mouth that night," Isabella sobbed, her small fists clenched. "And now I saw the same thing in the rich boy." Sarah sighed deeply, the exhaustion evident in her eyes. "Honey, sometimes when we are very sad and scared, our heads make things up to try to explain what we can't understand. That's normal, but you need to stop believing in these fantasies." The trip back to their small house on the outskirts of the city was silent, Isabella staring through the fogged window of the bus as she processed the frustration of not being heard. But the more she thought about it, the more certain she was of what she had seen, and more details returned to her memory. That night, alone in her tiny bedroom, Isabella opened the drawer where she kept the few belongings left of her father. There were some photos, a broken watch, and a small notebook where he logged his workdays. Flipping through the pages, she found something she had forgotten, strange notes from the last weeks of his life. "Itchy throat, worse at night," one entry said, dated 3 weeks before his death. "Feeling of something moving inside." A few pages later, "Bad smell in the room. Sarah doesn't smell it, only me." And in the final entry, written in shaky handwriting just 2 days before he passed, "I saw something. I can't tell anyone. They'll think I'm crazy." Isabella's hands shook as she held the notebook. Her father had also smelled the strange odor. Her father had also seen something, and now Oliver was going through the same thing. The next morning, Sarah had to return to the hospital to continue her cleaning work. Isabella begged to go along, promising to stay quiet and not bother anyone. Reluctantly, Sarah agreed, provided the girl promised not to go near the VIP floor. But as soon as they arrived at the hospital, Isabella realized something had changed overnight. There were more security guards in the hallways, journalists outside the building, and a tension in the air she could physically feel. Oliver had worsened. Disobeying the promise made to her mother, Isabella managed to sneak up to the VIP floor using the service stairs. The hallway was busier than the night before, with doctors constantly entering and leaving the room. She hid behind a supply cart and tried to listen to the conversations. "It's been 16 hours since the last convulsive episode," said a voice she recognized as Dr. Mitchell's. "Vital signs continued to deteriorate, but all tests still show normality." "That's impossible." Edward's voice was hoarse from shouting. "My son is dying." "And you can't tell me why?" "Mr. Sterling, I understand your frustration," Dr. Foster replied in a tired voice, "but we are dealing with something we have never seen before. We have consulted specialists all over the world, and no one has an explanation." "Then bring more specialists. Hire the whole hospital. I don't care what it costs." Isabella felt her heart tighten hearing the despair in Edward's voice. It was the same despair she had felt by her father's bedside, the same feeling of helplessness in the face of the inevitable. But unlike her back then, she now knew there was something she could do. The smell was stronger today. Even hidden in the hallway, she could smell that damp, unpleasant odor emanating from the room. It was as if something was rotting inside, something alive that was feeding and growing. During lunch, when the movement in the hallway slowed down, Isabella managed to get closer to the room door. Through the crack, she could see Oliver lying in bed, even paler than the night before. His breathing was so weak that his chest barely moved, and his skin had taken on an almost translucent hue. Edward was sitting, in a chair by the bed, holding his son's hand. The most powerful man in the country seemed to have aged 10 years in less than 24 hours. "Please, Oliver," Edward murmured, his words choked with emotion. "Don't leave me. You're all I have." It was at that moment that Isabella made a decision. It didn't matter if no one would believe her. It didn't matter if she would be punished for disobedience. She couldn't stand by and watch another father suffer the same pain she had endured. She stepped out from her hiding place and knocked lightly on the room door. Edward raised his head, surprised to see an unknown girl at the entrance. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir," Isabella said in a shaky but determined voice. "I need to talk about your son." Edward frowned. "Kid, this is a private room. Where are your parents?" "My mum works here cleaning. My dad died 6 months ago from the same disease your son has." Edward's expression changed instantly. He stood up from the chair, approaching the girl. "The same disease? How can you be sure?" "Because I saw the same thing that is inside Oliver's throat," Isabella replied, her voice gaining confidence, seeing that someone was finally listening to her. "My dad's skin also turned grey. He also had trouble breathing. He also felt an itch in his throat. And in the last days, I saw something come out of his mouth when he coughed." Edward knelt to be at Isabella's eye level, his eyes shining with a mixture of hope and despair. "You think you know what's happening to my son?" "I do, sir, and I know where it's hidden." At that moment, the door burst open. Dr. Alcott entered the room with 2 other doctors, stopping abruptly upon seeing Edward talking to a strange child. "Mr. Sterling, who is this girl? How did she get in here?" Edward turned to the doctors with an expression of fury Isabella had never seen before. "She is someone who might have the answers you haven't been able to find in over a day of investigation." "Sir, with all due respect," Dr. Alcott said condescendingly, "this is a child. We cannot base your son's medical treatment on childhood fantasies." "Fantasies?" Edward roared. "My son is dying and you don't even have a decent hypothesis about what's happening." While the adults argued, Isabella approached the bed where Oliver lay. The smell was nauseating up close, but she managed to focus on the boy's face. His lips were parted, and she could see his throat in the dim light of the room. "Does his throat itch?" Isabella asked, interrupting the argument. Everyone turned to her. Edward hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. "How do you know that?" "Because my dad had the same itch. He said it felt like something was scratching from the inside." Dr. Alcott rolled his eyes. "Throat irritation is a common symptom of many respiratory conditions." But Isabella wasn't paying attention to the doctor. Her eyes were fixed on Oliver's throat, and at that moment, as if responding to her thoughts, she saw a subtle movement in the shadows of the boy's open mouth. "It's there," she whispered, pointing at Oliver. "Right now. You don't see it because you aren't looking in the right place." Edward followed Isabella's finger, leaning closer to the bed. "Where?" "I don't see anything." "Deeper, in the throat." It was then that Oliver had a new spasm, his head moving slightly to the side. For a fraction of a second, under the light of the medical equipment, everyone in the room saw something dark and mobile disappear quickly into the depths of his throat. The silence that followed was deafening. The silence in the room lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Dr. Alcott was the first to recover from the shock, shaking his head as if trying to push away a hallucination. "That was just a muscle spasm in the throat," he said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. "The light can create shadows that look like—" "I saw it too," Edward interrupted, his voice low and tense. "There was something moving in there." Dr. Foster approached the bed, taking a small flashlight from her pocket. "Let's examine this more closely." She gently opened Oliver's mouth and directed the light into his throat. Isabella stood beside the doctor, her heart beating wildly. "Deeper, doctor. The thing hides when it sees the light." "Child, please," Dr. Alcott sighed impatiently. "Let the professionals work." But Dr. Foster ignored her colleague, concentrated on what she was seeing. Carefully, she used a tongue depressor to get a better view of the boy's throat. "There's something strange here," she murmured. "A different color at the back of the throat and, my God." Everyone crowded around the bed. Through the small circle of light from the flashlight, it was possible to see something that shouldn't be there. A dark mass, almost imperceptible, that seemed to pulse slightly. "What is that?" Edward asked, his voice hoarse with fear. "I don't know," Dr. Foster replied honestly. "I've never seen anything like it." Isabella took a step forward, her small hand touching the doctor's arm. "Doctor, when my dad was sick, he said he felt an itch in his throat, especially at night. He said it felt like something was moving. The doctors didn't believe him." "And you believe this is related to what we are seeing now?" Dr. Foster asked, treating the girl with the respect the other doctors had denied her. "I'm sure of it. On my dad's last night, I saw something come out of his mouth when he had a convulsion. It was dark, long, and moved on its own. After that, he was calm for a few hours, as if he had gotten better. But then, he got worse very fast." Edward put a hand on Isabella's shoulder. "Are you saying this thing might be killing my son?" Before Isabella could answer, Oliver had another spasm. His body contorted in the bed, and this time, clearly visible in the flashlight's beam, everyone saw something long and dark move quickly back into his throat as if fleeing the light. "I need instruments," Dr. Foster said immediately. "Dr. Alcott, bring the laryngoscopy kit. Now." "Margaret, you can't be serious," Dr. Alcott protested. "Based on what a child is saying?" "Based on what I just saw with my own eyes," she replied firmly. "There is something alive inside this boy's throat, and if we don't do something, he's going to die." While Dr. Alcott reluctantly left to fetch the instruments, Edward knelt beside Isabella. "Kid, what's your name?" "Isabella Miller, sir." "Isabella, I need you to tell me everything about what happened to your father. Every detail you can remember." The girl took a deep breath, organizing the painful memories in her mind. "My dad worked at a farm in the countryside for a few weeks. When he came back, he started complaining about a bad smell in our room, but only he smelled it. Then the throat itch started, mostly at night. He said it felt like it had a life of its own, and the doctors couldn't find out what it was. They ran very few tests, said it was the flu, gave him cough medicine, but he only got worse. His skin turned grey, just like Oliver's. And that smell. It was just like what I smell here in the room now." Edward looked around, trying to identify the odor Isabella mentioned. Indeed, there was something in the air. A damp, organic smell he had assumed was from the hospital's cleaning products. Dr. Alcott returned carrying a box of medical instruments, clearly annoyed. "Margaret, this is madness. We're going to put instruments down a child's throat based on the testimony of another child?" "We are going to save this child's life based on visual evidence of what we all just saw," she replied, organizing the tools. "Dr. Mitchell, I need you to help me hold the patient's head. Dr. Alcott, monitor the vitals." Edward held Isabella's hand as he watched the preparations. "If you manage to save my son, thanks to what this girl told us, I promise she will never be ignored by another doctor again." Dr. Foster carefully introduced the laryngoscope into Oliver's mouth, deeply illuminating his throat. What she saw made her instinctively recoil. "My God," she whispered, "there really is something here. It appears to be a parasite of some kind. It's long, dark, and attached to the wall of the throat." "A parasite?" Dr. Mitchell leaned in to see better. "But what kind of parasite could cause these symptoms?" "I don't know, but it's clearly obstructing the airways and probably releasing some kind of toxin causing the deterioration of the patient's overall state." Isabella stepped forward. "Doctor, can you try to take it out?" "It's very risky. If I try to remove it and it ruptures, it could cause a complete airway obstruction. But if you don't try, Oliver will die, just like my dad died." The room fell silent as Dr. Foster weighed the options. Oliver was clearly deteriorating by the hour, and all conventional treatments had failed. But trying to remove something unknown from a child's throat was an enormous risk. "Do it," Edward said finally. "If you do nothing, my son will die anyway. At least this way he has a chance." Dr. Foster picked up a long, delicate pair of forceps. "I'll need maximum stability." Dr. Mitchell, hold the head firmly. Dr. Alcott, prepare for emergency intubation in case something goes wrong. Isabella watched, fascinated and terrified at the same time, as the doctor carefully introduced the forceps into Oliver's throat. The parasite seemed to feel the instrument's approach and tried to hide deeper. "It's trying to escape," Dr. Foster murmured, sweat forming on her forehead. "I need to be fast." With a precise movement, she managed to grab one end of the creature. Immediately, the parasite began to contort violently, and Oliver had a convulsion stronger than the previous ones. "Vitals are plummeting," Dr. Alcott shouted. "Margaret, stop!" "I can't stop now," she replied, struggling to maintain control of the forceps. "If I let go, it will bury itself even deeper." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Dr. Foster managed to pull the parasite out of Oliver's throat, revealing a long, dark, segmented creature that contorted in the air like a snake. It was nauseating to look at, with small legs or cilia along its body, and it emanated the putrid smell Isabella had noticed. Oliver stopped convulsing abruptly. His breathing, which had been almost imperceptible, became deeper. The grey colour of his skin began to give way to a pinker tone. "Vital signs are stabilizing," Dr. Alcott said, incredulous. "How is this possible?" Edward rushed to his son's bed, tears streaming down his face. Oliver, can you hear me?" The boy opened his eyes for the first time in over 24 hours, looking confusedly at his father. "Dad? Where am I?" "In the hospital, son. But you're going to be okay now." Edward hugged Oliver carefully, his shoulders shaking with relief. Dr. Foster placed the parasite in a sterile jar, observing it with a mixture of scientific fascination and disgust. "I've never seen anything like this in medical literature. I need to send this for analysis immediately." Isabella approached the jar, recognizing the creature that had haunted her nightmares for months. "That was what was killing my dad." "Isabella," Edward called her, still holding Oliver. "You saved my son. How can I ever thank you?" The girl looked at Oliver, who was now sitting up in bed and drinking water, his color returning to normal. Then she looked at Edward with eyes that showed a maturity beyond her 10 years. "I just want to know one thing, sir. How did that creature get into your son? Because it doesn't appear out of nowhere. Someone put it there." The smile of relief on Edward's face slowly faded, replaced by a somber expression. He had been so focused on saving Oliver that he hadn't stopped to think about the parasite's origin. But now, with Isabella's words echoing in his mind, a terrible realization began to take shape. "Dr. Alcott," he said slowly, "I need you to preserve all medical evidence from the last 2 days and call security. No one enters or leaves this floor until we figure out how my son was infected." Because now Edward Sterling knew he wasn't dealing with a disease. He was dealing with an attempted murder. St. Jude's Medical Center was turned into a fortress in the hours following the parasite's discovery. Edward had activated his private security team, who were now working with the hospital administration to review every entry, every employee, and every visitor from the last 3 days. Isabella remained in the room with Oliver and Edward, refusing to leave the boy alone. Something in her instinct told her the danger hadn't completely passed. Sarah had tried to take her daughter home, but Edward insisted Isabella stay, recognizing she had become a fundamental piece in protecting his son. "Tell me about the farm where your father worked," Edward requested, while watching Oliver sleep peacefully for the first time in days. "I need every detail." Isabella held her father's notebook, carefully flipping through the pages. It was in the countryside, near a town called Oak Creek. He was hired to build a new barn. He was there for almost a month. "Do you remember the name of the farm, the owner?" "Manning Estate. The owner was named Robert Manning." "I think." Isabella frowned, trying to remember more details. "My dad said the man was very strange. He lived locked in a big house and only appeared at night to talk to the workers." Edward grabbed his phone and dialed his personal assistant. "Charles, I need you to investigate a place called Manning Estate in Oak Creek. Owner: Robert Manning. I want everything on him. History, business, connections, everything." While Edward spoke on the phone, Dr. Foster entered the room carrying a tablet and a worried expression. "Edward, I need to show you something about the parasite." She approached the bed, showing enlarged images of the creature that had been removed from Oliver. "I managed to identify it through an international database. It's a species of parasitic worm found only in very specific regions of South America, mainly in dense rainforest areas." "And what does that mean?" "It means someone brought this parasite from very far away specifically to infect your son. This creature doesn't exist naturally here in Chicago. It was cultivated and transported with a purpose." Isabella approached, studying the images on the tablet. "Doctor, what scares me most is that my dad caught the same thing." "Could it have been at the same farm?" "It's very likely," Dr. Foster replied. "But there's more. I analyzed the parasite and discovered it was artificially fed. There are residues of a special nutrient solution in its digestive system. Someone was keeping this creature alive and healthy for a considerable amount of time. Edward felt a chill run down his spine. Are you saying someone bred this parasite specifically to attack my son? It's the only logical explanation. This isn't an accidental infection, Edward. It's targeted bioterrorism. At that moment, Charles, Edward's assistant, entered the room with a folder of documents. Mr. Sterling, I've managed to get some preliminary information about the farm. Edward took the papers, his eyes moving quickly across the pages. Robert Manning, 58 years old, owner of Manning Estate for 15 years. History of... My God. What is it, Dad? Oliver asked, now fully awake and following the conversation. Robert Manning is the brother of someone I know. In fact, someone I financially destroyed 5 years ago. Isabella felt a knot in her stomach. Destroyed how, sir? Edward sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. Michael Manning was my partner in a mining venture. I discovered. He was embezzling money from the company and selling insider information to competitors. When I exposed the fraud, he lost everything. The company, the house, his family. His wife left him and took the kids. And what happened to him? He disappeared after the scandal. I never heard from him again. Edward looked at the documents again, but apparently he had a brother who might have held a grudge. Dr. Foster frowned. But Edward, how could Robert Manning infect Oliver? He's never been to the farm. It was then that Isabella had a terrible realization. Mr. Sterling, has the hospital had any new employees recently? Someone who started working here in the last few weeks? Why do you ask? Because my dad didn't catch the parasite at the farm. He caught it here at the hospital. Everyone looked at her, confused. Isabella continued, her words coming out fast as the pieces clicked in her mind. My dad went to the farm 2 months ago, but he only started getting sick 3 weeks ago after coming to the hospital for some routine company exams. And more. The strange smell didn't start the day he came back from the farm. It started after the hospital visit. Edward stood up from his chair, his features hardening. Charles, I need the list of every employee hired by the hospital in the last 2 months, and I want the footage from every security camera for the last 3 days. It's already being arranged, sir. Dr. Foster picked up the tablet again, showing more images of the parasite. There's something else I need to tell you, Edward. This creature has a very specific life cycle. It can remain dormant for weeks before becoming active, and when it becomes active, it needs a host to complete its reproductive cycle. Reproductive? Edward asked, alarmed. If we hadn't removed the parasite today and a few more days, it would have started reproducing inside Oliver's throat. That would mean hundreds of larvae spreading through his respiratory system. Oliver turned pale hearing this. Isabella moved closer to him, holding his hand to reassure him. But why didn't that happen to my dad? She asked. It probably did, but you didn't know. The larvae are microscopic initially. They spread through the system and cause multiple organ failure rapidly. That's how your father passed. Silence took over the room as everyone processed the information. Edward was angry, scared, and determined in equal measure. Someone had tried to kill his son in the cruelest way possible, and they had almost succeeded. Mr. Sterling, one of the security guards, entered the room. We found something strange in the medical supply room. Can you come see? Edward looked at Oliver, hesitant to leave him alone. I'll stay with him, Isabella offered. I won't leave his side. And I will too, Dr. Foster added. I'll stay here until you return. Edward kissed his son's forehead and followed the guard down the hall. In the supply room, other members of the security team were standing around a cardboard box that seemed to have been hidden behind medical equipment. What did you find? The guard opened the box, revealing several small vials with a dark liquid, syringes, and what looked like more parasites preserved in formaldehyde. There was also a folder with documents and photos. Edward took the folder, opening it with trembling hands. The first photo was of Oliver playing in the park near their home. The second was of Oliver entering school. The third was of Oliver arriving at the hospital on his first day for a routine medical checkup 3 months ago. They've been planning this for months, Edward murmured, his voice full of restrained rage. Flipping through the documents, he found detailed blueprints of the hospital, staff schedules, and a timeline that made his blood run cold. The plan was to infect Oliver slowly, over several hospital visits, creating a progressive illness that doctors would never be able to diagnose. But what shocked him most was the last page of the document. A list of other targets, names of children of other important people, all patients at the same hospital, all with appointments scheduled in the coming weeks. "My God," Edward whispered. "This wasn't just about Oliver. They're planning an epidemic." At the bottom of the box, he found a fake hospital ID badge with the photo of a man he didn't recognize, but whose name made his heart race. Dr. Michael Manning, specialist in tropical diseases. Michael hadn't disappeared. He had spent 5 years planning his revenge, and now he was inside the hospital, disguised as a doctor, ready to implement the final phase of his plan. Edward ran back to Oliver's room, but when he arrived, he found the door ajar and a deathly silence. Pushing the door open with force, he saw Dr. Foster unconscious on the floor, Oliver sleeping far too deeply to be natural, and Isabella pressed against the wall, her eyes wide with terror. "He was here," she whispered. "The man from the photo. He said he'd be back to finish the job." Edward rushed to Isabella, kneeling beside her. The girl was shaking violently, her eyes fixed on the door where the man had exited. "Isabella, look at me," Edward said, gently holding her face. "What happened here? What did he do?" "He came in dressed as a doctor," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. "He said he was coming to check on Oliver. Dr. Foster tried to stop him, but he put something on her neck and she fainted. Then he went to Oliver with a syringe." Edward felt the world spin around him. "Did he inject Oliver with something?" I screamed before he could finish. He turned to me and said I should have stayed quiet like a good poor girl, that because of me, his plan had been discovered too early. Edward quickly checked Oliver's vitals. The boy was breathing, but his sleep seemed unnaturally deep. On the table next to the bed there was an empty syringe that hadn't been there before. "Did he manage to give the injection?" "Just a little bit," Isabella replied, tears streaming down her face. "When I screamed, he got startled and spilled almost all of it on the floor. But he said it was enough." Edward hit the emergency button, and nurses immediately rushed into the room. "I need Dr. Alcott here now, and call security." While the medical professionals checked Oliver and Dr. Foster, Edward turned back to Isabella. "Anything else? Any detail could be important." "He talked about you. Said you destroyed his life, that you took everything from him, and that now he was going to make you feel the same pain." Isabella took a deep breath, trying to remember the exact words. "He said Oliver was just the beginning, that he had a whole list of children to infect, and that when he was done you would beg for death." Dr. Alcott came running in, immediately heading for Oliver. "What happened?" "Someone gave him an injection. We don't know what it was." The doctor began checking Oliver's reflexes, testing his reaction to light. "He's sedated, but his vitals are stable. I need to know what was injected so I can counter the effects." Edward showed the empty syringe to Dr. Alcott. "Can you analyze the residue?" "Immediately." He called a nurse. "Take this to the lab now. Priority analysis." Dr. Foster began to regain consciousness, groaning softly as she tried to sit up. Edward helped her, noticing a small red mark on her neck. "Margaret, can you remember what happened?" She touched her neck, frowning. "A man came in posing as a doctor. When I questioned his ID, he attacked me from behind. I felt a sting in my neck and then nothing." "Did you see his face?" "I did. He was a middle-aged man, grey hair, about 6 feet tall. He had a small scar on his forehead." She paused, concentrating on the memory. "And there was something familiar about him, as if I'd seen him before." Edward grabbed the photo from the fake ID he had found in the supply room. "Is this the man?" Dr. Foster looked at the photo and nodded immediately. "That's him. But Edward, where did you get that?" "It's my former partner, Michael Manning." Edward quickly explained about the discovery in the supply room and the list of other targets. We need to evacuate all the patients on that list, Dr. Foster said, still a bit dazed. If he has access to the hospital disguised as a doctor, he could infect anyone. At that moment, Charles, Edward's assistant, entered the room with an urgent expression. "Mr. Sterling, we have a problem. The security cameras were disabled 20 minutes ago, and 3 hospital employees are missing." "Which employees?" "2 security guards from the reception and a nurse from the VIP floor. We found their uniforms in the men's locker room, but they've simply vanished." Edward felt a chill run down his spine. "Michael isn't working alone." Isabella, who had remained quiet, suddenly stood up. "Mr. Sterling, I need to tell you something about my dad." Everyone turned to her. The girl picked up her father's notebook, flipping until she found a specific page. "Before he died, my dad wrote this." She showed a note made in shaky handwriting. "Robert is not who he seems. Saw him talking to another man about the boss. They were talking about making important people pay for something. Your father overheard. A conversation about me." "I think so. He wrote here that the man talked about a businessman in Chicago who had destroyed someone's life in the family, and that this person was going to get their punishment." Edward took the notebook, reading the entries more carefully. "Is there anything else?" Isabella turned a few pages. "Here. 3 days before he died, he wrote, 'I think they gave me something at the hospital. It wasn't an accident. I need to tell someone, but who will believe a construction worker?'" The silence that followed was broken by the alarm of one of the medical monitors. Oliver was having breathing difficulties again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the same pattern as before. "Dr. Alcott," Dr. Foster called out. "He's showing symptoms of toxin poisoning." Dr. Alcott rushed to the bed, quickly checking Oliver's vitals. The substance in the syringe must have been some kind of slow-acting poison. "Can you reverse it?" "I can try, but I need to know exactly what was injected." Edward grabbed his phone, dialing furiously. "Charles, I want you to mobilize all our contacts. Toxicology specialists, biologists, veterinarians, anyone who can identify tropical poisons. And I want it now." While Edward organized the resources, Isabella moved closer to Oliver, watching his face, which was starting to turn pale again. She knew there was no time to wait for specialists. "Dr. Foster," she called, "the parasite they took out of Oliver, is it still in the lab?" "Yes, why?" "When my dad was sick, there was a day he got better very fast. It was right after I saw the thing come out of his mouth. It's as if it took the poison with it." Dr. Foster looked at her intently. "Are you suggesting the parasite wasn't just sucking the life out of him, but also neutralizing some toxin?" "It's possible. Maybe that's why he lived longer than he should have with that much poison in his body." Dr. Alcott stopped what he was doing. "That is possible. If the parasite was feeding not only on the host's nutrients but also on toxins, it could have been functioning as a kind of biological filter. So what happens if we introduce more poison without the parasite there to absorb it?" "Oliver dies much faster," Edward replied in a hoarse voice. At that moment, the room phone rang. Edward answered automatically. "Hello?" "Edward?" Michael's voice was cold, but Edward could detect a tone of satisfaction. "I hope you're enjoying my work." "Michael, you bastard! What did you inject into my son?" "Something special I developed during these 5 years. A toxin extracted from Amazonian plants, completely undetectable by conventional methods. Your son has about 6 hours before it's too late." "What do you want?" "I want you to feel what I felt. I want you to watch your son die slowly, knowing you can do nothing to stop it." Michael's voice grew colder. "But I'm willing to make a deal." Edward gestured for everyone to be quiet. "What kind of deal?" "You have something that belongs to me. $10 million that you confiscated when you exposed me. I want that money back, with interest, and I want a public confession admitting you forged evidence against me." "That's a lie, Michael, and you know it. The truth doesn't matter now, Edward. Only your son's life matters." There was a pause. "Oh, and there's one more condition. I want the girl." Edward felt his blood run cold. "What girl?" "The cleaning lady's daughter." Isabella. She saw too much, knows too much. She can't stay alive to testify against me. Isabella instinctively backed away, her eyes filling with tears of fear. Edward pulled her close, hugging her protectively. Never. Then your son dies, and after her, I'm going after the other names on my list. How many children are you willing to watch die to protect a poor girl who isn't even your daughter? The call ended, leaving the room in absolute silence. Oliver was getting paler by the minute, his breathing becoming shallow. The poison was acting and time was running out. Edward looked at Isabella, knowing he was facing the most difficult decision of his life. Edward held Isabella tighter against him, feeling the girl's small body trembling with fear. Oliver was growing paler on the bed, his breathing becoming more labored with every passing minute. No, Edward said in a firm voice, looking at everyone in the room. I'm not handing this girl over to that monster. We will find another solution. Dr. Foster approached Oliver's bed, checking his vitals. Edward, I need to be honest with you. If we don't find the antidote in the next few hours, there's nothing we can do. Then we will. Find it. Edward grabbed his phone again. Charles, I need you to contact every lab in the country. I want them to analyze Oliver's blood and identify this toxin and mobilize our security team. I want to find Michael before he leaves the hospital. Isabella looked at Oliver, then at Edward. Mr. Sterling, if I give myself up to him, maybe he'll give the antidote. Never, Edward replied immediately. You saved my son, Isabella. Now it's my turn to protect you both. Dr. Alcott came running into the room with a report in his hands. Edward, I got some preliminary results from the syringe analysis. The toxin is a mixture of several Amazonian plants, some we've never seen before. Is that good or bad? It's complicated. The good news is we identified some components. The bad news is the traditional antidote won't work because Michael modified the chemical composition. Isabella stepped away from Edward, walking to the room's window. Dr. Alcott, my dad wrote some things about plants in his notebook. Could that help? She handed the notebook to the doctor, who began reading the notes. Interesting. Your father mentions several plants here that he saw at the farm. Some are known to have neutralizing properties. Neutralizing? Edward asked hopefully. Some Amazonian plants are used traditionally as natural antidotes for other poisonous plants. It's possible that on the very farm where this started, they have what we need. Dr. Foster took the notebook, examining the crude drawings Isabella's father had made of the plants. These notes are very detailed. Did he know botany? A little, Isabella replied. My grandfather was a healer in the countryside. He taught about medicinal plants. My dad learned some things from him. Edward felt a spark of hope. So it's possible we have the information needed to create an antidote. Maybe, Dr. Alcott said cautiously, but we would need the original plants and we don't know where to find them. I know, a voice said from the door. Everyone turned to see Sarah, Isabella's mother, standing at the entrance to the room. She was visibly nervous, wringing her apron in her hands. Sarah, Edward said, how do you know where to find the plants? Because my husband told me where they were before he died. She approached her daughter, hugging her tightly. On his last night, when he was delirious, he gave me a crude map. He said if anyone ever went through the same thing, I should show them where the plants were hidden. Sarah pulled a folded paper from her pocket, a hand-drawn map in her husband's shaky handwriting. The farm is 3 hours from here. He marked a spot in the woods near a creek where he saw these plants growing. Edward took the map, studying the details. I can send my security team to get the plants. It won't work, Isabella said. My dad wrote that the plants can only be identified by someone who knows the signs. And the only person he taught that to was me. You? He taught me in his final days, said it was important for me to know in case I ever needed to help someone. Isabella looked at Oliver, who was growing weaker. I need to go there. Absolutely not, Edward said firmly. It's too dangerous. Michael might be waiting for exactly that. Mr. Sterling, Sarah intervened, if there's a chance to save your son, just like my husband should have been saved, then it's worth the risk. Dr. Foster checked Oliver again. Edward, he has 4 hours at most if we're going to... Try this alternative, it has to be now. Edward ran a hand through his hair, weighing the options. Sending Isabella to the farm was risky, but it was the only real hope they had. Staying at the hospital meant watching Oliver die slowly. I'm going with her, Edward decided finally. Dad, no, Oliver managed to speak, his voice weak but determined. If you leave the hospital, the bad man might get you. Stay here with me. Edward knelt by his son's bed. Oliver, I need to do this to save you. Isabella can go, Oliver whispered. She's brave. And smarter than any adult. Isabella approached the bed, holding Oliver's hand. I'll go and I'll come back with the medicine, I promise. I'm not letting a child go alone, Edward insisted. She won't be alone, Sarah said. I know the way to the farm, and I know trustworthy people in the area who can help us. Dr. Alcott intervened. Edward, if you leave the hospital, Michael might try something against Oliver while you're out. It might be exactly what he wants. Then what do you suggest? That you stay here protecting Oliver and let Sarah and Isabella go. Send your security team with them, but at a distance. If Michael is watching, he can't suspect we're looking for an alternative antidote. Edward looked at Isabella, seeing the determination in the eyes of the 10-year-old girl who had saved his son. Are you sure you can identify the plants? I am. My dad made me repeat the description dozens of times. I won't forget. Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead. Let's save this boy, just like you wanted to save your father. Edward grabbed his phone, calling Charles. I need a discreet car and 2 security guards in plain clothes, and I want them to prep a helicopter to bring the plants back as fast as possible. While the preparations were being made, Isabella approached Oliver again. You need to stay strong until I get back, okay? Oliver nodded weakly. Isabella, if anything happens to me— Nothing is going to happen, she interrupted. I won't let you die like I let my dad. You didn't let your father die, Edward said softly. You were just a child, and the adults didn't listen to you. Now it's different. Now we all know you're right. Dr. Foster checked Oliver once more. I'll administer some medications to try to stabilize him while you're out, but I can't guarantee how long I can keep him stable. Sarah and Isabella were ready to leave when the room phone rang again. Edward hesitated before answering. Hello? Edward. Michael's voice was furious. My cameras told me there's strange movement in the hospital. I hope you aren't trying anything stupid. What cameras? You think I managed to infiltrate this place without having eyes and ears everywhere? I know every move you make. Edward felt a chill down his spine. If Michael had access to the hospital cameras, he knew about the plan to find the plants. What do you want, Michael? I want my answer. You have 2 hours to give me the money and the girl, or your son dies. 2 hours? You said 6 before. Michael laughed, a cold sound that made everyone in the room shiver. I changed my mind. It seems you need extra motivation. The call ended. Edward looked at Sarah and Isabella, knowing it had just become much harder to save Oliver. He knows, Edward said. He has cameras in the hospital. He knows we're planning something. Isabella looked out the window, then turned to Edward with a determined expression. Then we can't use the normal exit. Is there another way out of the hospital? Sarah thought for a moment. There's a service exit in the basement that leads to the employee parking lot. I use it sometimes when I finish my shift late at night. Michael might be watching all the exits, Dr. Alcott warned. Then let's give him something more interesting to watch, Edward said, picking up the phone. Charles, I want you to walk out the main entrance with 2 security guards, as if you're coming to get me for an urgent meeting. Make noise, draw attention. Meanwhile, Sarah and Isabella leave quietly through the basement. Isabella hugged Edward. What if I can't find the plants? You will, Edward replied, hugging her back. You already saved my son once. I trust you'll save him again. As Sarah and Isabella prepared to leave through the emergency exit, Oliver called out to Isabella in a weak voice. Isabella, thank you for not giving up on me. I'll never give up on you, she replied, tears in her eyes. I'll be back with the medicine. But when they reached the basement, they found 3 men, waiting at the service exit. One of them stepped forward, smiling coldly. Where do you think you're going? Sarah instinctively pulled Isabella behind a pillar in the underground parking lot, but it was too late. The three men had seen them both and began to approach slowly. "Don't try to run," said the tallest man, who seemed to be the leader. "Our boss wants to talk to you." Isabella felt her heart race, but she forced herself to think quickly. She looked around the parking lot, searching for an alternative exit. There was an emergency stairwell at the back, but they would have to pass the men to get there. "What do you want?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice firm despite her fear. "The girl," the man replied. "Dr. Manning was very clear about that." Sarah positioned herself in front of Isabella. "You'll have to go through me first." The man laughed. "Ma'am, we don't want to hurt anyone. We just want the girl. Hand her over and you can go." It was then that Isabella had an idea. She remembered something she had seen in the hospital over the last few days, the parking lot sprinkler system. If she could pull the fire alarm. "Mum," she whispered, "when I say now, run for the stairs." "Isabella, what are you going to do?" Before the girl could answer, she took off running toward the wall where the fire alarm lever was located. The men, caught by surprise, ran after her. Isabella reached the lever and pulled it with all her strength. Immediately, deafening sirens began to blare throughout the hospital, and the parking lot sprinklers activated, drenching everything in ice-cold water. "Now, Mum!" Sarah ran toward the emergency stairs while the men struggled against the water falling from the ceiling and the shrill sound of the sirens. The confusion gave them enough time to run up the stairs and reach a side exit of the hospital that led to a parallel street. "Quick!" Sarah panted. "I have a friend who works as a taxi driver nearby. He can help us." They ran 3 blocks until they found George's taxi, a 60-year-old man who had known Sarah for years. He saw them arriving wet and desperate. "Sarah, what happened to you?" "George, I need an urgent favor. Can you take us to Oak Creek?" "Oak Creek, Sarah, that's a 3-hour drive. And are you running from something?" Sarah looked at Isabella, then back at George. "It's a matter of life and death, George. A child is going to die if we don't get there." George hesitated for only a second, then opened the taxi doors. "Get in. We'll figure it out on the way." As the taxi left Chicago heading toward the countryside, Isabella took the map drawn by her father and studied every detail. She had to perfectly memorize the way to the plants because she might only have one chance to find them. At the hospital, Edward was growing more desperate. Oliver had worsened significantly in the last hour, and Dr. Alcott was struggling to keep him conscious. "Where are they?" Edward murmured, pacing nervously around the room. "They should have reached the farm by now." Dr. Foster checked Oliver's vitals again. "Edward, I need to prepare you for the possibility that we might not have enough time." "No," Edward replied firmly. "Oliver is going to survive. Isabella will make it." Oliver opened his eyes with difficulty. "Dad, is Isabella okay?" "She is, son. She's getting the medicine that's going to cure you." "She's brave," Oliver whispered. "Braver than me." "You're brave too, Oliver. You've been fighting this for days." The phone rang again. Edward answered reluctantly. "Edward?" Michael's voice was furious. "Your little friends pulled the fire alarm and escaped. Very creative." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do, but it doesn't matter. My men are already after them, and when they catch them, I'll make sure you watch while your little heroine pays for what she did." Edward felt rage boiling inside him. "Michael, if you touch a hair on that girl's head—" "What? You'll sue me! Expose me again!" Michael laughed bitterly. "Your threats don't scare me anymore, Edward. You already took everything from me once, now it's my turn." The call ended. Edward immediately picked up his phone and called Charles. "I need you to send our security team to Oak Creek. Now, Sarah and Isabella are in danger." Meanwhile, on the road to the countryside, Isabella began to recognize the landscape her father had described. The rolling hills, the small farmhouses, the dirt road that led to the estate. "It's here," she said to George. "Turn on this road." George slowed down as he entered the dirt road. "Sarah, are you sure it's safe? This place looks abandoned." Indeed, Manning Estate seemed deserted. The main house had its windows shuttered, and there were no signs of life anywhere. My dad's map shows the plant location behind the house, Isabella said, pointing to a trail that vanished into the woods. Near the creek. They got out of the taxi and began walking along the trail. George decided to stay with the car, keeping the engine running in case they needed to leave quickly. The trail was steep and full of rocks, but Isabella followed it with determination. She knew Oliver was counting on her and she couldn't fail. After 20 minutes of walking, they reached the creek Isabella's father had marked on the map. The water ran crystal clear between the rocks, and there was a small clearing surrounded by tall trees. "It's here," Isabella whispered, looking around. "Dad wrote that the plants are near the large rocks." Sarah helped her daughter search, clearing branches and dry leaves from around the rocks. It was Isabella who found it first, a small plant with dark green leaves and a reddish stem, exactly as her father had drawn. "I found one," she shouted excitedly. Sarah moved closer, helping to carefully dig around the plant to remove it with the roots intact. "Did your dad say how many we needed?" "At least 3 different plants. This is the first one." Isabella consulted the map again. "The others should be upstream." They continued searching, following the course of the creek. They found the second plant, smaller, with tiny yellow flowers, growing in a crevice between 2 rocks. The third plant was harder to locate. According to the map, it should be in a small grotto hidden behind a waterfall. When they finally found it, Isabella was sure it was the right one. It had silver leaves and a strong medicinal smell. "We got them," Sarah said, hugging her daughter. "Now let's run back to Chicago." But when they returned to the clearing where George had been waiting, they found the taxi empty. There were signs of a struggle in the dirt, and George had vanished. "Mom," Isabella whispered, "they got here before us." Indeed, 3 men stepped out from the surrounding woods. They were the same ones who had tried to catch them at the hospital. "Very well, girls," said the leader. "Now you're coming with us, and bring those plants. Our boss will want to see them too." Sarah hid the plants behind her back. "Where is George?" "He's fine, for now, but that could change depending on how you behave." Isabella looked at her mother, then at the men. She was so close to saving Oliver, but now it seemed it had all been in vain. "What are you going to do with us?" "You're going to accompany us back to Chicago. Dr. Manning wants to personally finish what he started." It was then that Sarah had a desperate idea. "Isabella, run!" Sarah threw a handful of dirt into the eyes of the nearest man and pushed Isabella toward the creek. "Take the plants and run. Don't look back." Isabella grabbed the 3 plants and ran as fast as she could, hearing the men's shouts behind her and the sounds of a struggle in the clearing. Tears streamed down her face as she ran through the woods, but she didn't stop. She had to get back to the hospital. Oliver was counting on her, but lost in the thick woods, carrying the life-saving plants and not knowing if her mother was alive or dead. Isabella Miller had never felt so alone and terrified in her 10 years of life. The sun was starting to set, and she knew Oliver wouldn't last much longer. Isabella ran through the woods for nearly an hour, her small legs burning with exhaustion, but she refused to stop. The 3 plants were safe in her hands, wrapped in the shirt she had taken off to protect them from branches and thorns. The darkness of night began to fall over the forest, and the nocturnal sounds frightened her. Every noise seemed like Michael's men coming after her, but Isabella kept running, guided only by the determination to save Oliver. When she finally emerged from the woods, she found herself on a dirt road she didn't recognize. She was completely lost, not knowing which direction to take to get back to Chicago. It was then that she saw headlights approaching. For a moment she thought of hiding, fearing it was Michael's thugs. But when the car stopped and she recognized Charles, Edward's assistant, stepping out of the vehicle, Isabella collapsed in tears of relief. "Isabella, thank God we found you!" Charles ran to her, followed by 2 security guards. "Where is your mother?" "They took her," Isabella sobbed. "And George too, but I got the plants." She showed the 3 carefully wrapped plants. Charles took them gently, noting the girl's state of despair. "We're going back to the hospital right now. Mr. Sterling's helicopter is waiting at the farm." During the flight back to Chicago, Isabella didn't take her eyes off the plants. Every minute that passed was a minute less of Oliver's life. She only hoped it wasn't too late. At St. Jude's Medical Center, Edward paced nervously around the room while watching his son, who was growing weaker. Oliver could barely open his eyes, and his breathing was almost imperceptible. "How much more time does he have?" Edward asked Dr. Alcott. "Maybe an hour, 2 at most," the doctor replied with sorrow. "I'm sorry, Edward. We did everything we could." It was then that Edward heard the sound of the helicopter landing on the hospital's helipad. His heart raced with hope when he saw Charles running into the room with Isabella and the plants. "We did it!" Isabella shouted, running to Oliver's bed. "Oliver, I brought the medicine!" Oliver opened his eyes with difficulty, managing to crack a small smile upon seeing Isabella. "You came back." "Of course I did. I promised I'd save you." Dr. Alcott took the plants, examining them quickly. "These are exactly the species we needed, but I'll need at least an hour to prepare the extract." "An hour we might not have," Dr. Foster said, checking Oliver's vitals. "Then let's start now," Edward said. "Do whatever it takes." While the doctors rushed to prepare the antidote, Isabella stayed by Oliver's side, holding his hand and whispering words of encouragement. "You need to hold on just a little longer," she said. "The medicine is being made." Oliver nodded weakly. "Isabella, what about your mum?" Isabella felt her eyes fill with tears. "She's fine. She had to stay to take care of some things, but she's fine." She couldn't tell Oliver that her mother had been captured. Not now, when he needed all his strength to survive. 40 minutes later, Dr. Alcott returned with a syringe containing a dark green liquid. "This is the plant extract. Theoretically, it should neutralize the toxin, but we've never tested this before." Edward looked at the syringe, then at his son, who was nearly unconscious. "Do it." Dr. Alcott slowly administered the injection, and everyone in the room fell silent, watching Oliver and waiting for any sign of improvement. For long minutes, nothing happened. Oliver remained pale and motionless, his breathing nearly imperceptible. "It's not working," Edward murmured, feeling his world collapse. But then, gradually, color began to return to Oliver's face. His breathing grew stronger, and he opened his eyes fully for the first time in hours. "Dad?" Oliver said in a clear voice. "I'm thirsty." Edward collapsed into tears, hugging his son tightly. "Oliver, you're okay." Isabella smiled through her own tears, but her joy was interrupted when the room door burst open. Michael Manning walked in, followed by 2 armed men. "What a touching scene," he said sarcastically, "but the party's over." Edward positioned himself in front of the bed, protecting Oliver. "How did you get in here? Where are the security guards?" "Your guards are no match for determined men," Michael replied, "and I have something you want." He made a sign, and one of the men pushed Sarah into the room. She was bruised, but alive. "Mom!" Isabella ran to hug Sarah. "Now that everyone is gathered," Michael continued, "we can finish this properly." "What do you want, Michael?" Edward asked. "I want justice. You destroyed my life based on lies, and now I'm going to destroy yours. The evidence against you was real, and you know it." "It was forged," Michael shouted, losing his composure. "You paid people to plant false evidence because you couldn't beat me honestly." Edward looked at Michael with genuine confusion. "What are you talking about? The evidence was found by the auditors themselves." "Auditors you bribed?" It was then that Isabella had a realization. She remembered something her father had written in his notebook, something she hadn't paid attention to before. "Mr. Manning," she said, stepping away from her mother, "my dad wrote something about your brother, Robert." "Isabella, no," Sarah whispered, fearing for her daughter's safety. But Isabella continued. "My dad heard Robert talking on the phone with someone. He said he had planted false evidence at Mr. Sterling's company and that he had received a lot of money for it." Michael turned pale. "That's a lie." "It's not a lie. It's written here in his notebook." Isabella took the notebook and found the page. "It's right here. Robert received money to put fake papers in the company. Said his brother would never find out it was him who set it all up." The silence in the room was deafening. Edward looked at Michael with a mixture of shock and realization. "Your brother betrayed you," Edward said slowly. "He created the false evidence against you to hurt me, but in the process he ended up hurting you too." Michael shook his head, refusing to believe it. No, Robert would never do that to me. Mr. Manning, Isabella continued softly, my dad also wrote the name of the person who paid your brother. She flipped through a few pages. Of the notebook. Mark Vance, Mr. Sterling's company rival. Edward felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Mark Vance was his biggest business rival, someone who had tried to buy his company several times. Mark used your brother to destroy us, Edward said to Michael. He knew that if you were exposed, our partnership would dissolve, and he could buy our company for a fraction of its value. Michael dropped the gun he was holding. 5 years. 5 years I thought you had betrayed me. 5 years planning this revenge. And Robert let you believe it because... He was also paid to keep quiet, Edward continued. He used you, Michael. Just like Mark used all of us. Tears began to stream down Michael's face. My own brother. He knew what this would do to me. Knew I would lose everything. We still have time to fix this, Edward said, cautiously approaching Michael. We can expose Mark and Robert. We can clear your name. Michael looked at Oliver, who was watching everything with wide eyes, then at Isabella, who looked at him with compassion instead of fear. I almost killed an innocent child, he whispered. I almost killed your son because of lies. But you didn't, Oliver said in a weak but clear voice. Isabella saved me, and now you can help save other kids too. Michael knelt on the floor, covering his face with his hands. What have I done? My God, what have I done? Edward stepped closer and put a hand on Michael's shoulder. You were deceived just like I was. But now we know the truth. In the days that followed, the truth came to light. Mark Vance and Robert Manning were exposed and faced the legal consequences of their actions. Michael collaborated fully with the authorities, helping to dismantle the corruption network that had cost so many lives. Oliver recovered completely and developed a deep friendship with Isabella, who began visiting the Sterling family regularly. Edward set up an educational fund for Isabella, ensuring she could study at the best schools and fulfill her dream of becoming a doctor. Sarah was promoted to cleaning coordinator at the hospital, and the Miller family moved to a better house in a safer neighborhood. Michael, after serving a reduced sentence for his cooperation, dedicated himself to working with organizations fighting bioterrorism, using his experience to protect other children. But it was Isabella who had the most special destiny. Years later, she graduated from medical school as she had dreamed, specializing in pediatric toxicology. And she never forgot the lesson she learned when she was only 10, that sometimes being heard is the difference between life and death. At Isabella's graduation, Edward gave an emotional speech about how a brave girl had saved not only his son's life, but had changed the lives of everyone around her forever. True strength, he said, doesn't come from money or power. It comes from the courage to do what is right, even when no one is listening. Isabella taught us that even the smallest voice can echo loud enough to save a life. And as Isabella received her diploma, she thought of her father, knowing he would be proud to see how his daughter had transformed the pain of losing him into a force to save others. His notebook, now framed in her office, was a constant reminder that every life has value and that it's never too late to make a difference. The story of a poor girl who saved a millionaire's son had transformed into the story of how truth, courage, and compassion can triumph over revenge and hatred, proving that true heroes come in all sizes, ages, and social classes.